put yourself in the mind of your client. He has to pitch it to his boss as well. And the pitch is so much easier internally when you can say, I've tried this new product. It's better than the current product we're using today. Here's the price points. Here's how it works. I've done it 100 times. I can show you it. I like it. All of a sudden, you've made the pitch so much easier for your buyer.
Welcome to the Product Market Fit Show, brought to you by Mistral, a seed stage firm based in Canada. I'm Pablo. I'm a founder turned VC. My goal is to help early stage founders like you find product market fit. Shmulik, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
So, you've been working on Argyle now for a few years, but you're a multi-time founder. You'd started a different company before that and sold it. I don't want to go too deep into that story, but I'm sure it'll have to do with the origin story of Argyle. So let's start there. How did you come up with Argyle in the first place?
Yeah, this is one amazing accident. To trace the origins of Argyle, or to sort of go back to 2014, in that moment where there was Uber for everything. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, and you could click a button and get cookies delivered or get your groceries delivered. And the one button that you couldn't click yet was get your car picked up and returned to you. With a co-founder, we set out to build sort of Uber for parking. And it was sort of a smashing success. From a product standpoint, everybody wants that valet experience. And we were quite lucky. We raised about $50 million over the course of several years. But the business was very much, from a unit economic standpoint, not profitable. And I think we had that insight early on, and we pivoted the business to an enterprise motion where we were selling software to large corporations.
I'm curious, what was the model? What was that valet model? That was just I leave somewhere, I just click a button, somebody picks it up, parks for me, gives it back. Was that the idea?
You have it. Wow. I know it sounds fantastic when you hear it. The issue with it will for always be that you need a human, on every other block in a city, and you need parking spots everywhere in a city. It's just talk about fixed cost. And so the more cars that you park, the sort of more money you spend, until you theoretically get to some place where the numbers cross. We got the closest in Seattle, if you must know, because there was a lot of density, which was the game there.
It's funny how these models, I think back 2014, that's when I started my company, Gym Track, which was about tracking, workouts in the gym. And it's also one of those, it sounds awesome when you hear it, doesn't make that much sense when you try and make it happen.
Yes.
All these things get funded then. I guess now what gets funded is anything with AI, whether it makes sense or not. But there's these errors, right? Back then it was these marketplaces or quantified self. If you said that, there was money for you.
Yeah. Since we're going down the tangent, I also think another thing that gets funded is product that investors like to use themselves. Every investor would love their car picked up in front of their office and dropped off in front of a restaurant in the evening. And we had that. So we had a product that our investors wanted to use. It was so easy to pitch the product. And that's what really got us going. It's just the underlying business model is something I really have become much more focused on as I've grown as a founder. And sometimes, and I think you're going to hear with Argyle, it's the boring stuff that makes money. Sometimes the sexy, interesting things are really great ideas, fun to use, but aren't money makers, aren't durable businesses. And I think that's what we had.
That's right. They get you we won demo day. You know what I mean?
That's right.
They get you that, but they don't necessarily get you what you really want, which is an outcome.
We had an aha moment in that business sort of in 2016 about where we were like, hey, we don't want to keep spending money. What is the business inside of this business that is real, that people would use, that has positive unit economics? And what that was software. Being able to give fleet management software to large fleet managers like Avis, like Enterprise, rental car, that was a real company. And so we pivoted the business. I'm sort of fast forwarding a little bit, but I ended up in the later years, around 2018, spending an enormous amount of time at airports, because that's how the fleet management model works. You stick a lot of cars at an airport, they sort of hub and spoke model. out to the city. And I became super interested in not the cars at the airport, but the people driving them around, and getting somebody to actually work for 4 weeks or 5 weeks to drive vehicles around from the airport to the city is hard work. They're very fickle workers.
This is like fleet. This is like Hertz or Avis, like fleet management. Like the cars end downtown, but they need to be by the airport. So you have just a human to go drive it. Okay.
And I didn't know it at the time, but the problem that Avis or Hertz or Enterprise has is actually very similar to the problem that Chipotle or Target or Best Buy or Walmart have. It's high volume hiring with people that don't last that long. And so you're constantly having to rehire your staff. And the best way to do that is with software where you don't have to individually interview them. There's ways to take data to understand what's the likelihood that they'll show up for work. The gimmick that we had, or the trick that we had with Avis, was, can we get one of these applicants to log into their Uber account or their Lyft account? And we would be able to surface to Avis, hey, Shmulik has driven 1,000 miles, has driven on Uber for 6 months, has a 4.5 rating. This is somebody that is going to be willing to drive cars for you. And that was the very early stages of what I would now consider pre-employment screening services. I know, a really wonky long term.
And this was at Argyle, or this was still at Car Global, your last startup?
I had left Stratum, and I was sort of fooling around with a lot of different concepts. This was one of them. And I was lucky enough to meet my co-founder, Audrius, who's now Argyle's CTO. And, we had the luxury of time because we got to play around with ideas, and this was one we were super excited about, and we knew contacts at Avis.
Is this kind of after the exit? You have some, let's say, good stuff in the bank account happening. You have some time. You got the energy to kind of go at it again.
Yes, and I know that this is sort of talking about the journey. I do consider ourselves lucky to have an exit that did give us some cash, where we had the space and the time to think things through, which I don't think I had when starting the fleet management company. Space and time is a really helpful thing. It's always good to think about it before you start building. That's what we have there.
It's almost the reason why, going back to an earlier point, like I think as a first time founder, there's the hype that attracts you to, like, how do I tell a story that gets me money? And there's the need that's like, how do I get some money in the door?
Yes.
Like, I remember we were obsessed with just like, because revenue was so far away for us. The only way to get money was fundraising. We were obsessed with fundraising for the first couple of years. It's a little backwards, but you understand like where it comes from, having gone through it.
100%. And I think that also that desire to get the first client, to send the first invoice, to get the first $100,000 of revenue, those are great desires. And you want to be as efficient as possible at achieving them, but you also don't want to take shortcuts. And that's kind of that dividing line of you want to make sure that you're onto the right concept that's in a really big market that has the right unit economics. And so you have to sort of guide yourself and be able to listen to yourself and to the market as you're exploring those things.
Going back to the main storyline, I guess my question is, you have this idea of using existing data, like alternative data, let's say, about who these drivers are through Lyft and Uber. What was Avis and Hertz and Enterprise, what were they even doing at the time to interview? Like, what was the before and after?
It's actually a very frequent story, but people go into an office with their resume, right? And their driver's license, and 2 referrals, and you have to call them up on the phone, and there's this huge phone bank to verify their employment. And I think that the elephant in the room with Argyle is this other business that you might have heard of before called Equifax, huge credit bureau. And Equifax has a huge business line that does pre-employment screening for this exact reason, because it's a huge problem set across every single vertical where you need to hire a lot of people at McDonald's or Target or wherever, and you need a service that can verify their previous employment. It just so happens that a lot of this is still done, frankly, manually. But that was the case at Avis as well.
Okay, so you show up with this idea, you have some relationships. Like, what's step one? Like, do you MVP it? Like, where to go from there?
I'm happy to report the very first version of the Argyle service was a website that an Uber driver just logged into, and they took a screenshot of like this sort of fake resume we would build. It would generate from their Uber profile data, but it would just sort of put like a certificate on a page, and it would have their name and the star rating, and they would take a screenshot of it, and it would have the Argyle logo at the bottom, and they would show this screenshot to an Avis clerk on the other side. And because they knew me and they knew what Argyle was, there was a way for them to like, oh, I know what this screenshot is. But it was a very retro first experience because we were just trying to figure out, like, could we shorten the cycle times? Could we get down to a day, to one connection to get hired for the job? And that was sort of the early winnings.
This is a bit in the weeds, but I think it's important. Like, how did you get in? You went to Avis and you told them about the service. How did you get in front of the drivers for them to even go into this place and kind of get this certificate? Did Avis tell them to do it, or did you market directly?
Super low tech again, which is when Avis sends out a job posting, and it still happens today on Craigslist, on JobVite, there's all these requirements for what the job is. Print out your resume, come with 2 references. And so they just added another thing. Get a resume from this website. I believe our first website was actually precompletion.com, a super long URL. We just added it in as text. Again, it's something that completely doesn't scale, but we were trying to get the first, 500, 1,000 people to try it. And what we've done over time, we're sort of mapping the origin story and where Argyle is everybody that needs income and employment data needs different pieces of it. And so a big part of the service that we've come to realize is really important is that everybody can build their own resume now. And figure out what they want to put on the resume or on the verification report.
Are you charging Avis at this point, or what are you trying to get out of this kind of first pilot?
Yeah, there was no billing or invoicing set up at that time, so that was not in place. We were. This is a company, and it's still the culture of the company today, but we're really building backwards because we're not industry veterans. I don't come from an income verification background. I have no experience in credit bureaus. I've never worked in any of these businesses. And so we've been so client-led from the very beginning. We've just been getting feedback from each one of our clients. The first client that paid us was a business called Level Goals, which is still around. They were a small dollar lender, and Level Goals only was interested in doing lending to gig workers. And so we had already built the first, integrations into Uber and Lyft for the Avis use case, but they just wanted to use those same data points, but to issue a small dollar loan for $100. And I believe they gave us $1 per verification. And that was the first paying client. And that is a much bigger business just for the industry for income verification. But that's also become a major business for us as well.
How much time went through from the first pilot with Avis until you signed that kind of first paying customer?
It took a while. The first year of Argyle, I believe, until the late part of 2019. Argyle was founded in 2018. Until the late part of 2019, we had no paying customers. We were just building. And I think we got our first couple of customers in late 19, including Level Goals.
What was hard about it? Like, what are you building? Because from the outside looking in, you're like, okay, we've got this resume builder thing. It's got like the main KPIs on it. I feel like somebody should pay for that.
What is novel about Argyle, what we had to build literally from scratch, is connectivity into payroll processors. And, some history or some stats to make it interesting. The IRS says that there's about 6,000 registered payroll service providers, which is a really wonky term, but basically just means there's 6,000 entities that are allowed to submit payroll on another company's behalf. That's a super fragmented market. And in order to provide income verification, Argyle needs to connect into every one of those platforms. And for any business of value to use a verification service, you need to have most of that connectivity built out. The initial wedge, and again, totally on accident, just because there was this huge correlation between people that worked for Avis and gig workers. We had this natural wedge at the beginning where we were building out connectivity just into gig platforms. So Lyft and Uber and Instacart and DoorDash, Lug, at the time Postmates was still around. And that is tough to do if you're doing it all by yourself from the very beginning. You're having to build, microservices into third-party applications that you are not under the control of, and so you need to build into their spec.
How did you think about when to charge? Like, I'm on this question because I think like the lean startup kind of methodology would tell you as soon as you deliver a unit of value, like try and figure out what it's worth, especially as a first time founder, what you're going in with or what you're hammered with. If you go to an incubator, accelerator, all these sort of things, you didn't do that. And you didn't do that with the experience you had in your previous company. So it was like deliberate. Curious if you could just dive a bit more into how you thought about it back then and where you were trying to get to in that first year before you started charging.
I'm a big advocate for having sort of a pilot customer that you're kind of giving the product away for, or the feature away for free for a period of time. And they're helping to design the first version of it with you. And we still do this today when we release new product. The first couple of people that use the new feature, we give it to them for free for a little bit because we want them to see value in it. And for it to be part of, when it becomes part of a general release, then you should start to charge for it. But I think it's important to get people using your product and to be able to get feedback on your product, even if it's negative, and then put the pricing part on it. That's been a big part of my strategy, and I think it works at different levels of scale as well.
Well, it's funny you talk about design partners. I was actually just watching the review of the AI pin and also the Rabbit one or whatever, and that was kind of the comment. These products are like over MVPing, like the Humane pin. Like it's just coming out half baked. It's worse with hardware, obviously. But, you come out half baked with all these promises of features in the future. You've just taken the MVP thing too far, right? So I think what you're saying is, especially I think with enterprise, the design partner helps you get to figure out what the real MVP is that you can really charge for.
Yes.
The risk is you're building something that actually is never a top priority, never going to become a top priority, kind of getting stringed along. What signals are you looking out for to make sure that there's something real here? When you decide to charge for it, the money will be there.
To use your AI pin as an analogy, I like building tools that are just a better mousetrap instead of something that is actually new. And I think the AI pin is like, that's a net new product, which makes it even harder to extract value out of or to price around. Everything that Argyle builds, even in the early days, is just a better, faster, cheaper, more automated version of something that a business is already paying for. Every lender already pays for income verification services and to know income by year. We're just giving you the next generation of it. And I think it's easier to price around that because there's already a reference of value with a client, but they're already spending on it. So they're not allocating new spend or having to get a new PO or get a new approval. I like to say that every business spends on income verification services already. You can go to your P&L. We do this as part of our sales cycle. How much money do you spend on this today? We're going to cut your cost. But it's a very different way of communicating with a client, with a prospect, than trying to convince them that they need a widget that they're not buying today. We just have a better widget.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's an important distinction. Like if you're selling B2C or B2B, but I think B2B is clearer, and there's already budget allocated and being spent on something. It's not budget risk. It's not demand risk they need to solve for, which is really what an MVP does. It's actually more like product and value. Like, are you actually going to be that much better than that other thing? And that just takes time.
Put yourself in the mind of your client. He has to pitch it to his boss as well. And the pitch is so much easier internally when you can say, I've tried this new product. It's better than the current product we're using today. Here's the price points. Here's how it works. I've done it 100 times. I can show you it. I like it. All of a sudden, you've made the pitch so much easier for your buyer, for your client.
I think that's another thing, and I've heard this many times going through these interviews, is like, in your case, you're a repeat founder, a little bit different, but it's not that different in the sense that as a startup, you have like no credibility. And I think sometimes founders forget that. Like you have no credibility. The larger enterprise you're selling into, the less credibility you have.
Correct.
So you need ways to establish that. And having worked with someone for months as a design partner, definitely can check that box.
100%. And use that lack of credibility if you can to your advantage. You're going to be allowed to give out product that's more MVP, to get feedback in a way that the big behemoth in your space can't do. So there's a way to have some asymmetry there.
So walk me through this first paying customer. It actually wasn't in the same vertical, it was a different vertical, it was a lending use case. How did you find them? Why did you find them? Like all the story around them.
So many of our clients have found us via Google search. So please, like SEO optimization, I'm a huge fan of. But Level found us through the internet because if you're trying to verify income for gig workers, there's a lot of search like verify Uber gig worker income. You can run search queries against that or ads against that. And that's how they came to us. Equifax doesn't verify gig worker income. So there's this cool white space that we completely fell into on accident where our gig integrations, you just could not get that data through a credit bureau. So there was something cool that was just happening there organically.
Were you like optimizing for those keywords before you even had a customer in the space, or did they find you a different way and then you realized that was a white space?
Yeah, gig income verification, those are great keywords. They still work today. We like if you type that in, Argyle comes up.
How did you turn that one customer into like a dozen customers all inbound, or did you start going outbound as well?
Yeah, we built out a very small sales team. I also think that the first 100 clients that we got, I was heavily involved in that. And I really do encourage founders, stay involved in sales and customer success for longer than it feels comfortable. I still do a lot of it today because I think that hearing from the customer about their pain points, why they're buying your service, what about your service doesn't work, you need that to keep building. And so a lot of the early sales were me. We kept on iterating on the SEO strategy. We found lookalike clients. It just also happens to be that in this industry, lending, it's a massive space. And you can start to go out to the largest lenders that leverage Equifax service or a credit bureau service. And you can start calling on them and say, hey, I have some results to show you with other clients. Would you like to use this service? It's having these sort of outsized results. And that's how we started. That's how we kept on iterating.
You mentioned staying as close to your customers as possible, especially on the sales and customer service side. I couldn't agree more. I actually think that's one of the most common mistakes is hiring kind of this VP sales a little too quickly because you want somebody who's a pro, who's going to create a great sales organization and all these sort of things. And in fact, there's this company I saw not too long ago. They bootstrapped to 2 million in revenue, 9 people, effectively break even, raised a few $1 million. And the first thing was VP sales, right? Like beef up the team, blah, blah, blah. A year later, they're still doing 2 million in revenue, right? Like it just completely flatlined because it was too early. Do you have, this is maybe a bit too specific, but just to give some, maybe make this point more tangible, like, do you remember some of the things, anything that you would have learned back then because you were so close to these customers, because you stayed close on sales or on customer success, some of the things that customers might have told you or you might have gleaned from sales calls that actually, because there's subtleties, right? There's small tweaks that sometimes are the difference between something that sells and something that, has too much friction.
Well, I think a lot of why I still stay so close to clients is they know more about income verification than I do. And so my clients have been educating me on this space and how Equifax does it, how we're different, what type of data they need, how they want it organized, how they want it calculated. And it's great to get all of that education from your clients. Because you're hearing their challenges and you're able to get from them what they wish was different, and then you can just go build against it. I find myself really being a product manager masquerading as a CEO. And so just from a product manager's mindset, it's great to hear the client's problem so you can build the solution. And the closer you can get to the problem, the better. You don't want to be disintermediated from that conversation. I think that's the reason why we've kept our sales team really lean. Even today, Argyle does not have a VP of sales. We have this GM strategy where there's a general manager for each one of our key verticals, but all in the purpose of like keeping ourselves as close as possible to the client.
One of the best ways I heard this kind of explained to me was it's really a learning flywheel, right? And if you think about, if you have an AE and then a VP sales and then you have to hope that message goes through that entire chain before it gets to you and then makes its way to product, versus if you're the one that's kind of touching all these things. And at the beginning, speed and adaptability is what it's all about. So that's really kind of putting yourself there makes that flywheel so much tighter and everything moves so much faster.
I think this is a podcast for tech founders. Like, you're a tech company, right? Like, you're not a sales company. The thing that Argyle does better than anybody else is build technology for income verification. That's what most of our team is focused on all day. That you can have a lean team that is go to market and still be really successful. That's not the key differentiator. The key differentiator is the product, the technology that you're building.
Totally. So walk me through maybe just on the fundraising side, because things started to happen pretty quick. Like, Bain kind of led your seed. It was like $2.5 million or so. And then a year later, $20 million Series A, which is a pretty big Series A, especially just a year after, a pretty normal size seed. Like, walk me through that story. How did you connect with them, and why did they decide to make such a big investment?
Yeah, I guess we're gonna make some news public, or we're gonna give some inside takes. But Ajay at Bain reached out to me on LinkedIn, and Ajay, if you're listening to this, I believe it was you that reached out to me personally. But yeah, it was a cold email on LinkedIn where Ajay said that he had heard that we were building something really interesting, and he wanted to come and meet me in person. And he came to our 2-person WeWork that was kitty cornered to the bathroom. So you had to look at everybody going in and out of the bathroom every day as you sat in your cubicle. He came to the office and he sat down and he really dug into the business and he liked it. I think there's a lot of similarities between what Argyle does for payroll and what some other people like Plaid or Finicity have done for banking. And so there are some corollaries and an investment thesis around it that really worked. The learning there for me is just be really open to every conversation. Any investor could be the investor for your first round. And some people get picky about who they want to respond to or what order to get investors in. Just talk to everybody. Don't be scared about sending your deck. I certainly wasn't. I think that's the reason Ajay found out about me, because somebody forwarded a deck that I had sent to somebody, then to him, right? And it was because I was super open with sharing and wasn't trying to guard the material. And so I think that's how it worked.
And so it's one thing to do, $2.5 million or so. I think that's, they believe in you, they believe in the thesis, got it. What happens in that year that leads them to do $20 million check? Like, that's a big size check. They must have seen some serious traction or something that led them to really lean in.
Two things. I think between the seed and the A, we were able to form a real business plan around the company we were building. During the seed round, we had 1 or 2 clients. We had this level goals. We had this primitive product. I wasn't able to articulate yet the industry we were in. And when we had reached the A, I had done a lot of market analysis on what is Equifax. And, Equifax is going to do something like $2.7 billion this year in income verification services. How big is the income verification services market? Apparently it's $11 billion a year market. It's a huge market. And because we were able to articulate the market we're in, the business plan we have for that market, and yes, some really good traction and growth, and a very sticky product. Once you start using Argyle, you just keep using it. Those are the sort of the set of metrics we needed to get a real investment check. And I think it also, the other part of the Argyle business, and it's still true today, but it's very true in those days, this is an expensive company to build. Building and maintaining payroll integrations to thousands of registered payroll service providers is not cheap. It's infrastructure. And you have to have the infrastructure working at very high uptimes. And so that was part of the investment thesis. Let's invest. Let's build real infrastructure that does income verification. A promise that if people build it, if we build it, people will come. And that has panned out for us. It did take me sort of articulating to Bain, to the market, that there's a huge business here, that this is not just a fun and games company.
Do you think that would have been possible for you to do as a first-time founder? Because I think there's one thing with, hey, I've got 2 million ARR, 5 million ARR, here's a ARR multiple, and you raise an A. And it's another thing to say, I'm actually over here on ARR, but I want a round that's this big because I'm going to build all this stuff and then it'll come. There's a different level of kind of risk that the investor's taking. Do you think that's more suited for like a proven founder like you then, or do you think it still would have been feasible as a first-time founder?
I think TAM is super important. And being able to articulate what is your TAM, How are you tracking against that TAM, or what is your SAM? Like, you need to be able to say those with conviction, and you need to be able to say that your revenue is tied to them and have a good thesis around it. And I think that matters more than what your ARR is in the aggregate, or if you're a first time or a second time or a third time founder. Can you articulate the business you have and the industry you're building it for? Can you articulate a plan where you can be 50%, 40% of that market? That's what investors want. They want to know that you're going to become the winner in a space, and they're going to invest and give you dollars based on that analysis, because it's the analysis they're doing when they write the investment memo. So you're doing the hard work for them. And I think that has a lot more about, are you 1 million or 3 million first time or second time?
I love that answer, and it's the perfect segue to my second question, which was, what was your story? What was your plan? Like, you're basically saying Equifax, they do $2 billion in revenue. We can take some of that. At this point, you're doing like gig worker stuff, which is like this little ignored niche. What's your plan to take the rest, right? The kind of core market.
What the analysis includes is there's Equifax, which is this huge player in this space, but Equifax itself is still a small part of the overall industry. It's an $11 billion market. Equifax is less than 3 billion of it. What is the rest of this market? And the fun answer is that the majority of income verification services happen manually. So our largest competitor is paper, is phone banks, is emails, is scanners. And that was such a crucial part of the analysis, that to win in this market, do we need to win against Equifax? Yes, but to win this market is really to replace paper. And that's such a great concept, that your competitor is that legacy analog methodology.
And just to be clear, these are companies using paper, or these are who's using paper? Like, how does that generate $8 billion in revenue?
Yeah. So it's the cost of all the staffing agencies that pick up phones, that send out emails, but it's also a lot of servicing companies. There's a great partner we have today, but there's also part of this analysis called Acrolis. And the only thing that Acrolis does is scan PDFs and give you the OCR data of them, right? It's a huge business because there's so much paper out there. But there's all these sort of businesses that are just providing income verification for paper-based models. And that's what the $8 billion is.
So that was your story, was, listen, if we can just tie into all the payroll, we'll have all the data, and then we can just automate the whole thing. No need to call, no need to email, because it'll all be verified.
It's just a great formula is find a better mousetrap. Build a product that's just a better version of a product that already exists, because it's a lot easier to sell. There's a bunch of people that already buy the product. It's a lot easier to invest in, because it's just like, here is the higher margin version of something that's already out there. And that's the formula we were using.
Well, that's actually a question for me, which is, when you're selling to these companies, whether the lenders or whoever they are you selling an ROI story, or are you selling just a replacement story? Like, hey, today you're paying X $1,000 a month for verification, pay me half of that, I'll do the same thing. Is that more the pitch?
It's both, but we lead with the latter, which is we're a way to reduce costs. We're a more automated solution. You're going to need less staff. I know some people are worried about saying that out loud. Argyle means you have to have less personnel internally or externally. There's less manual review. You're going to just spend less on verification services.
And because one thing that I find is hard is when you go in and you say you're going to save X hours, right? Like, do you give that a dollar value? How do you get as hard as possible on the clarity of the savings?
Again, with Equifax, they have a rack sheet, and we've not, in a non-sophisticated way, given pretty big discounts against the Equifax rack sheet. So we can just articulate savings against your Equifax bill. But another thing that we would do in the early days, and we still do it today, is we would ask our clients, share with us, what are you spending on verification services every year? You spend it already. The reason why we're asking is because we want to reduce your cost, right? So tell us what you're spending. We want to give you a proposal that's cheaper. And it's also a great way to get market intelligence on what price points are, what businesses are spending on this product.
Those are the two things that when you're selling B2B is, one, find a way to kind of get credibility, which is like, this idea of, obviously, if you're from the space, from the industry, but otherwise design partners, giving things for free, and just being able to kind of get the product to a certain level. And the second piece is proving out clear ROI, whether you're adding revenue to them or you're affecting the KPI of that department, or reducing costs. But the harder, the better, right? Like, the softer, it's efficiency, it's time saving, it's, 4 hours a week, whatever. it's just hard to rise to the top of the list and get the adoption you need.
People like analysis that has dollars and cents in it. There's no reason to get more fancy.
So let me finish off on kind of these two questions. When did you, like, you raise the Series A, you start building out all these APIs. When do you have a sense that it's still kind of a bit of an idea? I mean, obviously you have customers, you have some revenue, but it's a big a thesis. Like, I'm going to invest in all this infrastructure and revenue will come out the other side. When do you start to get the feeling like, okay, now what, this is actually working? Like, my idea that I had on paper is becoming reality.
Once SoFi and Lending Club and Checker and New Res and Fannie Mae, once we started to get these sort of logos just piloting with us, and the reason why we're today is because of these investments with clients we made several years ago. It takes 12 months, sometimes 24 months for a client to really use us for their main verification flow. But once these sort of enterprise names start to use our service and give us positive feedback, it was sort of happening in the 2021, 22 timeframe. That's when I was like, okay, we have a real business here. It's still subscale. In many ways, Argyle is subscale today if you're comparing us to Equifax. But I think once those sort of logos started to use us, the game got much more serious.
And would you say that's when you felt like you had kind of true product market fit?
The product market fit I felt pretty early, even in the gig space, because it just was such an addictive product. Even with level goals, they just wanted to use it for every loan they transacted with. I didn't realize how big the business was until we exited the gig space, or until we sort of went to all types of income. A good way to know product market fit is if you have a lot of clients that are addicted to using your product and keep using it day after day. And that we had.
Perfect. And then the final question we like to end on is, if you could go back, whether at the beginning of this startup or the beginning of your first startup, with kind of one piece of advice, what might that be?
Gosh, I would have, I don't know if it's advice. I wish that we did even as much planning as we did. We've rebuilt Argyle several times. I think we're on API version 3. And a lot of that is because we were so interested in just tinkering, building, getting feedback, building again. And I do think that has at several junction points has slowed us down, because we've had to convince clients to pivot over to the new version of our API because we rebuilt it from scratch because we realized it was wrong. And some of that is just, we could have been more strategic about the product or the infrastructure we were building and be more thoughtful about it. I encourage people to, it's great to build an MVP. When you build the real version of it, be super thoughtful. It's okay if it takes a little longer than you want it to. It will pay dividends later.
Well, we'll stop it there, Shmulik. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for jumping on the show.
I enjoyed it.
I just gave you content that you liked so much, you actually listened to the end. And guess what? You didn't pay a single dollar. Not only that, I didn't even put any ads in your face. So you just got a bunch of content for free. And now that I've delivered that value, I'm asking for something in return. Open your app. Open Apple Podcasts, open Spotify, open whatever app you use to listen to this, and hit that follow button. It's actually going to help you, because it's going to help you make sure you don't miss out on the next episode, which you like so much that you listen to the whole thing.